A decades-old rivalry between Darlene and Becky rears its head again, while Dan butts heads with his brother-in-law, Neville. And we also say hello to an old fan favorite. Let's talk the Connors. Hey guys, Dan here. This is Dan Reviews It. Welcome to my Connors review for Season 6, Episode 5. This is called When Sisters Collide and the Return of the Grifters. And like I mentioned, Becky and Darlene kind of going at it about one thing, Dan and Neville going at it about another. And then we have a surprise appearance towards the end of the episode from an old fan favorite. So before we launch into the specifics here of this episode and my thoughts on it, hello, welcome into Dan Reviews It. Great to have you back here. We do the Connors every single week that there is a new episode, so please check out my Connors reviews. But there's plenty of other stuff on the channel as well. We've got movie and TV reviews galore. I try to post something new just about every day on the channel, so there's always a lot to check out, not just the Connors stuff. But if you are here specifically for the Connors reviews and whatnot, I do have a playlist on the homepage that is just, going to be where the Connors reviews are. So easier to find, but I do urge you to check out my other reviews as well. A lot of cool movie and TV stuff. Please consider subscribing, click that like button, and comment below. I love talking Connors with the fans. So, if you saw this episode, let me know your thoughts on it. And if you didn't see it, we do spoilers here on the Connors reviews, so I would suggest watching the episode first and then coming back to this video for my review. So this was directed by Jody Margolin Hahn, who's directed almost all of the episodes for this season thus far. I think there's only one she did not. And then it was written by Corey Kaplan. Don't know who that is. However, Dave Kaplan, who wrote the last episode and co-wrote the first episode of the season, he has been a part of the Roseanne and Connors family for a long, long time. So I'm assuming this is, his son or something like that. But Corey Kaplan, as near as I could figure out, this is his first official writing credit for the Connors. And how did it play out? Well, this turns out to be a pretty good episode, one of my favorites so far this season. So let's talk about what happens in it, and then I'll tell you why I enjoyed it so much. So we will start with the first part of the title, as we usually do, When Sisters Collide. So this goes back many, many decades with the Becky and Darlene fighting about who is smarter, because of course Becky got great grades, straight A's, all of that, and Darlene maybe was a little more street smart, but obviously she's proven herself over the years, by going to college, whereas Becky did not. And Darlene had a job as a writer for a magazine that's pretty recent. We dealt with that in the Connors. And Becky was a waitress when Roseanne season 10 started and going into the Connors. And so there's a little battle of like, okay, who's smarter, and really what it comes down to, which we learn later in the episode, is who is kind of better off, who has the better life. And I think that is really, really an interesting kind of thing. And look, as always, my life, dovetails continuously with this family, and specifically, Darlene and Becky, because they are the same exact ages as myself and my older brother. So when the original show was on, we were the same age as them season by season. And it was the same. Now, my brother ended up going to college and then to law school, and he's very, very successful. But he got straight A's in school, and I didn't. However, I was in the school's gifted program. I had passed that test or whatever, and he didn't. So there was always that kind of like, okay, well, he got better grades, but, I'm pretty smart in my own way, whatever. But, the jobs I've always worked have been more akin to Becky's. They've been certainly more, blue collar, whereas, my brother is a successful, paralegal and all of this. And, that's awesome. We have never really had that kind of, rivalry that Becky and Darlene has. I guess a little bit in high school when my grades weren't the best, and my parents would be like, well, you're supposed to be gifted. What's wrong with you? I just am not a great test taker. But like Darlene, I've always been a great writer. in English class, straight A's every single year across the board, and even through college. I did some writing classes, etc. But that's where my sort of brain is, and Darlene's as well, and Becky and my brother, maybe a little more book smart, good test takers, that sort of a thing. So I definitely relate to this kind of rivalry from over the years. Like I said, me and my brother don't really go back and forth like that, but even from the start of this episode. So the episode opens in the Connors living room, and first of all, Neville was there, so I was like, oh my god, we haven't really seen Neville all season, so this is great. But we have Dan not there. He comes in later, but Ben and Darlene, Becky, Neville, and Jackie are all there watching The Golden Bachelor, and Ben rips off a quote and misattributes it, so Darlene corrects him, Becky corrects her, and then the two of them go back and forth. No, this person said it. No, this person. And then Jackie looks it up on her phone. Oh, Becky got it right, and that pisses Darlene off, and they start kind of going at it, which is something that I really, it's cheap shots or what would you say, like one-liners or whatever. But from that original Roseanne, like in, I don't know, probably well, they always kind of had their rivalry, maybe season 2 or 3 or whatever it started. But, the sharp wit going back and forth. And Darlene usually, because she has kind of a quicker mind to react or whatever, whereas, Becky's better at like studying and regurgitating that information. Darlene was always quicker on her feet, so it was nice to kind of harken back to some of those like one-liners or whatever. Sitcoms used to do that. When I was a kid, it was a lot of one-liners. Recently I watched all of The Odd Couple, and I watched all of Mary Tyler Moore, and some of these old shows, and I rewatched Cheers for the first time in many, many years last year. And it's a lot of just kind of one-liners back and forth, and insults, and some of the shows that people still watch today from that time period. Golden Girls, was all about kind of insulting each other, and Friends had some of that too. But so it was just kind of nice to get back to a little moment of that from the old Roseanne show, where Becky and Darlene kind of going back and forth about, which one was better, which one was smarter, whatever. So anyway, that manifests itself. We'll get back to Dan entering the scene later, but that manifests itself the next day when Jackie comes to visit Darlene at the school, and then we see Mark. It's another slight Mark episode. Harris is the only person that is a full-timer on the show that we didn't see in this episode. She was mentioned. Jackie said the reason for her being at Darlene's lunchroom is because she needed to get out of the lunchbox, so she was letting Harris kind of test out the waters for running it. So great. And then Mark comes in with 2 of his friends, and one of his friends tries to, kind of talk down basically to Darlene. And of course, Mark's like, oh, he didn't mean anything by it. And Darlene was like, no, he did. He thinks I'm an idiot. He thinks I'm, certain things because I have this job, and he doesn't know anything about me. So she learns about this trivia night, which is mostly for college kids, but we've shown in this episode that anybody can go because Becky has a team there as well. But Darlene and Ben end up going to this trivia night, and we have the trivia master. By the way, if you watch my channel enough to know that I went through all the Frasier episodes when they did the Frasier reboot in November and December, they did a trivia based episode with Frasier. And the gentleman, and I should have looked up the actor's name, but the actor that plays the trivia master here, you guys can tell me in the comments, but he was in that episode of Frasier. He was in, I think, 2 or 3 episodes this season of the new Frasier. He plays, the one of the like heads of the department or whatever at the university where Frasier is currently teaching. But he plays in this the trivia, the game master, the host of the trivia night. So kind of some nice synergy there. But like the Frasier episode, which I did a video on, I complained about, sitcoms usually do not get the gist of how trivia nights really work. because I guess maybe it's not exciting enough for TV to have the host say a question and then people are all writing it down or whatever. We've had trivia episodes of The Office, and the new Frasier did one. We've seen a handful of them because trivia nights are so popular now. So this doesn't exactly go how a normal trivia night would go, but whatever. But they say at the beginning, like, this is going to be kind of Jeopardy rules. Whoever gets the question has the access to then answer the next question, and so on and so forth. I'm not sure how that would work in a trivia night with, some of the trivia nights I've gone to have had up to, 15, 20 teams. I don't think it could really work like that. But of course, for this show, we're focusing on just 3 teams. So that's Mark and his friends, Darlene and Ben, and then Becky and her, fellow students. So it comes down to the final 2, and Becky and Darlene are the last 2 teams standing, and they get into a big fight. And there was sort of a not quite a breaking of the fourth wall, but like a wink and a nod kind of thing when, the tiebreaker question was, what sitcom, with a famous family has a vegan for their daughter. And of course, they were talking about that earlier in the episode. They were waiting for pizza, and Darlene had to get a specialty made pizza because she's a vegan. So even if you never saw an episode of The Connors before, you knew that Darlene was a vegan. So this, joke is sort of going on. And of course, I know the answer, Lisa Simpson. But obviously they want the audience to think that they're sort of doing an in-joke about Darlene. It's a little hacky, but I thought it was cute. So anyway, they end up fighting and getting kicked out. But we see in a later scene that really the crux of that whole thing is stemming from Darlene being upset about her status currently in life. She's like, look, I thought at this point in my life, at this age, we would, I would be a little bit more, of a success or what have you. And here's you, Becky, you're doing great. You're in school, you're sober, and X, Y, and Z. And this was an interesting argument because I never really looked at it like that, although I'm sure Darlene felt that way because, of course, for a while she was like doing the Uber Eats or whatever, or DoorDash Eats, and then she got this job at Mark's school as a cafeteria lady. But we as the audience, we're like, okay, well, she's doing what she needs to do for her son, but whatever, she's internalizing it, and I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense. Like I said, most of my jobs have been pretty blue collar, and working food and working in customer service and that sort of thing. And so yeah, I definitely get it. But Becky points out, look, you are the reason that I have what I have. You helped me and Beverly Rose out in giving us a place to live, and you've helped us out with money and all this other stuff, and my successes are your successes. And then Darlene says, well, can my failures also be your failures? And Becky's like, no, I think you need this one. You can have them. But whatever. So that sort of wrapped that up. But I really, really liked that whole dynamic this episode, because I get it. I'm like I said, I'm Darlene's age. I'm 46. And I definitely have questioned that. What makes a success, and what have I done in my life that would lead me to be a success, if indeed I am one, and why. And then I look at my brother, who, like I said, is very successful, and both my brothers are. I have a younger brother as well, and he's pretty successful too. So it's like both of them, I would say on certain levels, have definitely experienced more success than I have. But hey, look, they don't have YouTube channels, so there you go. I'm a little bit of a success more in that other area, and I used to be a DJ on the radio, and I was DJing for many years, and that's something that I was proud of, and whatever. So the point is, at this stage in our lives, me and Darlene, and maybe you too, it's easy to kind of question, okay, am I doing the best that I can be doing? And for Darlene, I really think she is. I mean, her allowing Mark to be enrolled in school, it is a huge, huge win for her, without having really to pay for it. So if she's working at the school, then great. She can give him that education that's going to give him a leg up. And, that's kind of the American dream, right? Doing everything you can to make sure the next generation, is lifted up, is a success. Certainly, Dan Connor has always done that. And so speaking of that, let's shift gears to the Dan storyline, because this is already going on quite long. But the return of the Grifters is the part of the title that involves Dan. So Dan comes back in this opening scene, and somebody, I think it's Ben, or maybe it's Neville, notices that he has like one of those protective, reflective vests. And Ben's like, oh my God, that was you I saw picking up, garbage. So we learn that Dan has been doing community service, and this leads Neville to question what happened with the DUI. So Dan basically took the hit on a DUI for that Neville should have gotten I guess it was last season, right? And Neville gave him $500 to get a lawyer and deal with that. And Dan was like, you know what, I needed to spend it on other things. Something else came up, so I took the hit, and now I got this community service, and I'm doing my time. So what's the difference? What's the big deal? Neville feels lied to, and look, I've loaned money to people, and I've learned that you can't really dictate what they do with that money, even if it's for a specific reason. I mean, as long as they're not blowing it on drugs or something, as long as they're using it and they have their reasons, it is what it is. But I guess this was really not a loan. It was, I gave you $500 for this lawyer, and Dan did not use it as such. And so they get into a little bit of an argument, a screaming match, really, or a threatening match anyway, in this, the first scene. So we see later on, Neville comes to the lunchbox and says, look, I got to go. I don't want to be here. If Dan comes by or whatever, I don't really want to see him. He's not welcome at our house. I can't deal with liars, this and that and the other thing. And he falls just short of actually calling Dan a grifter, as he did in a previous episode. That might have been, was that last season too? It's hard to tell with the strike because this season is so pushed back. It might have been just last season, but in any case, so Dan obviously did not like that then, and he doesn't like it now, and now he's being called a liar. So Jackie's kind of stuck in the middle of this. She doesn't want, her brother-in-law Dan and her husband Neville, who is also Dan's brother-in-law because Dan is married to Louise, which is her. So he's like brother-in-law in two ways, But anyway. So Jackie, plans to get them in the lunchbox together, unbeknownst to them, and they end up kind of having it out. But we learn later on, when Neville shows up at Dan's house, at the old Connor establishment, what the money really was used for. And this was the surprise guest, the surprise fan favorite that I mentioned in the intro. Natalie Wiest showed up as Crystal. I did not know we were getting a Crystal episode this season, and it may turn into an arc. I'm not sure. But she is actually temporarily living at the Connors house. And we learned that she was having some health issues that her husband, which was, of course, Dan's father, played in the original series by Ned Beatty. And he basically brushed it off and was like, oh, don't worry about it. You'll be fine. And it turns out it was actually something fairly serious. So Dan feels kind of responsible. So he used the $500 to get her medicine that she really needed, and to help her with some of her hospital bills. So, boy, oh boy, it was an emotional moment because, of course, look, Neville doesn't have the history with Crystal that we do. They only just met in this episode. But she did have one funny line when she was like, okay, so you're married to Jackie, and Dan, you're married to Louise, who is Neville's sister. She's like, wow, you guys don't go, I forget the way she worded it, but it was like, you guys don't fish off too many ponds or whatever. That was funny the way she said it. But yeah, so they had never even met before. So he doesn't know Crystal from Adam, but us as the viewing audience, I was like, oh my God, like Crystal's back. And we've seen her a few times since the return of Roseanne. She was in Roseanne season 10 for sure. And she was in at least one or two episodes of The Connors because they had a small storyline with her son, which is technically Dan's brother as well, or stepbrother, or whatever, or half brother. I don't know how that works, but anyway, so we had that little story arc. So we saw her there too, but it's been a few years since we've seen her. So it was awesome to see her. I mean, Natalie Wiest goes back to the first season of the original Roseanne. She worked with Roseanne and Jackie at Wellman Plastics. I mean, she is one of the OG characters of this show, and she was even in the opening credits. At least the first couple of years. I think, well, she was in the opening credits at least starting season 2. Maybe she wasn't in the first year, but anyway, she's been around a long time, so it was awesome to see her. And hopefully they continue on with that storyline, and we find out what's going on with her. But that certainly put things into perspective for Neville, of course, and then him and Dan kind of commiserated about both of their fathers not really being there for them, and being kind of liars and grifters, etc. Which is why obviously the word grifter hurts Dan so much. So it was nice for them to have that out. So we actually got 2 emotional scenes in this episode. Sometimes we just get the one. Usually we get at least one with this family, but this time it was 2. Both stories had a nice emotional resolve that I hope opens up a little bit to, like I said, see Natalie Wiest a little more as Crystal. I think the Darlene and Becky thing, that's been kind of resolved. We're going to put that to bed. Although there was a funny tag scene at the end where Darlene, came back to the trivia bar and is insistent on being there every week to beat all the college kids with her knowledge. So that was pretty funny. But overall, this was a really good episode. We've had a rocky start to the season. The first, I think, 2 episodes I didn't really love, and then we got the episodes with Estelle Parsons, which were fantastic, and now we've got this episode with Natalie Wiest. But more importantly, I think, than Crystal returning is the 2 storylines kind of resolving and getting that closure that hopefully Neville has a better understanding now of what Dan does for this family, for everybody that he loves. And so that's why I said earlier, with Becky and Darlene's thing, one of the things parents really strive for, I think, is, at least, good parents, is, having their kids succeed more than them, and doing anything that you can to make them a success. And that is Dan Connor through and through. It's been him for decades. It is why he really is, my all-time favorite TV dad. And growing up, I don't think I would have said that necessarily from Roseanne. He was certainly great, but maybe there were some better examples out there. I don't know. You could say Dick Van Dyke, maybe on the Dick Van Dyke Show, or whatever. And we grew up with Leave It to Beaver, so I was always a big Ward Cleaver fan. But seeing how he has taken action in all of the recent seasons of the Connors, in addition, is just, he really is, I think, for me, the all-time best TV dad. Let me know your thoughts about that. I mean, is Dan Connor on that sort of Mount Rushmore for you? I assume you wouldn't be watching a 25-minute Connors review video if you didn't love this character as well. But so look, we've got MVP of the episode, and there's a few really good choices here. This was a funny episode too. I didn't really talk too much about the humor, except a couple of those jokes I butchered, but we had some really good jokes. Aunt Jackie really brought some funny lines. Darlene and Becky going back and forth was great. But I think we have to give MVP to John Goodman as Dan, after waxing poetic, for the last few minutes about how great of a father he is, and a brother-in-law, or what would he be to Crystal? I guess nephew, right? No. Stepson? Yeah. Because she married his dad. The Connor family tree, so many branches. But I guess, right, he would be technically her stepson. But of course, he was friends with Crystal back in the day. So I got to give it to John Goodman as Dan Connor, for the MVP of this episode. Grade-wise, I leave this episode, let me get the title one more time, When Sisters Collide and the Return of the Grifters, I leave it with an A+. minus. And next week we will have another new episode of the Connors, so that will be exciting. And I think it's going to be a Mark episode too, because it says hanging in dorms with boys and the secret life of men. I assume hanging in dorms, the only one with a dorm in this show is Mark, so I assume we're getting another Mark episode next week, which will be fun. All right, thank you so much for watching Dan Reviews It, and we'll see you next week with another Connors review. Bye.